Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name's Merrill, and I'm the BDS recorder for VC55, the counties of Leicestershire and Rutland, which are, has to be said, pretty unremarkable counties in terms of their Odonata populations. We're in the lowlands of the East Midlands, and we just lack any special habitats over here. However, something that was really quite remarkable happened over the last winter period in terms of Odonata recording. And that is what I intend to share with you over the next session. However, probably my primary goal this afternoon is to convince as many of you as possible to follow in my footsteps over the forthcoming winter recording period and thereby contribute to our ever-expanding knowledge of the distribution, what the true distribution is of this fascinating species. So I'm going to stop my video at that point, because I'm sure you'd rather concentrate on the slides rather than my smiling face. So this is the format for the next 30 minutes or so. So I'm going to give you an intro on willow emerald colonisation, and that's both from a UK perspective, but particularly zooming into VC55 to talk about what's happened there. So focusing your efforts, what I really, as I say, I really do hope to convince you to follow me, and if you're going to take the time to make this recording effort, I really want to be able to enable the best bang for the recording book amongst the gathered crowd. And then we'll zoom in. The final couple of sections is where I want to focus some time and really put across my personal experience, my personal learnings in terms of where you're going to search, where might you be best searching in your local environment for this species, and then we'll zoom in right to the detailed level and we'll look at exactly what the clues are. So I've got to thank Adrian Parr for this fantastic graphic. Thank you, Adrian. And this illustrates a couple of things really, really well. So first of all, it's very clear how the willow emerald appeared in Suffolk, and it's incrementally spread all directions, east, north, and reaching its current position. So, okay, so a great distribution atlas, but what my eye really focuses in now is these gaps, these white areas. We know where it is, but where might it be? And this is where I'm saying this is the page from the Atlas of Opportunity. I see this as a great opportunity to actually establish where this insect really is currently. So we could say, if we drew a line north and south of the head of the River Severn estuary, that's pretty much the westerly limit as we know it of willow emerald in 2022. However, there's loads and loads of white areas. There's loads and loads of apparent gaps in that population. And I would be really, really surprised if it wasn't already present in the majority of these. And certainly the ones further to the east of that range, okay, further west, we're getting out onto the limits. But even there, I think there's huge opportunities. And I'm hoping that there's lots of people on the call this afternoon that live in those areas of opportunity. And just think how exciting it is if you can go out and you can be the recorder to add the 10-kilometre grid square to the known distribution. You record the species for the first time in the UK. It really gives me such a buzz. And you can see I've overlaid the VC55 boundary in red on there. So unfortunately, my opportunities are pretty much exhausted. I've got very few 10-kilometre grid square still to go at, but I think that also illustrates really well the focus effort. You know, I'm quite out to the west of that distribution, and I think anywhere to the east of there, I think focused effort in the right places will realise some great revelations, some fantastic results over this coming winter. So just in terms of the spread then, so a lot of us probably know Suffolk 2007, this species appeared, and then as you can see, it marches out. Adrian's graphic shows this very well, how it's rapidly expanded over time. So I start to get excited in 2016, it reaches Northamptonshire, just to the south of my recording area. 2017, it's Lincolnshire, so we're getting close now. then bang, 2019, fantastic. The Willow Emerald has now arrived in Leicestershire, Leicestershire and Rutland. But already, so it's appeared at 2 dots. It's in Ibrook Reservoir, so that's quite well to the east of the counties, which one would expect. But it's also discovered at Watermead Country Park, just to the north of Leicester City. So already there's quite a gap, and one could start to think, okay, where might it be in between those two areas? So 2020 comes along, and not too much of a difference there. We've got half a dozen sites recorded now, all to the east of Leicester, but apparently still quite a sparse distribution. And bang, look at this! What an incredible increase in a single season, a 1500% expansion, and surely that's never happened before in a county in terms of a colonisation of a species. But what I want to emphasise here, okay, so this is the 2021 flight season, but it is also the winter recording period after, so that's the winter of 2021-22. So that's where the real clincher is, and what I want to talk about a little bit more as I go through these slides. Certainly in VC55, I would say that the Willow Emerald damselfly is the most tricky species to detect, to record, certainly in the summer flight season and certain late season, and certainly in the low densities in which it often appears, particularly in the west of Leicestershire. Even now it's in very low densities. So imagine you're doing your summer recording rounds and you come to typical habitats such as this, and you're confronted with this huge amount of overhanging vegetation over the water's edge. Probably viewing conditions aren't all that easy. There's so much vegetation to search through, and at low densities there might be just 1 or 2 Willow Emerald damselflies present, and anyone who's spent time watching Willow Emeralds will know that they can spend minutes, even hours on end, motionless on a branch in amongst leaves, and they really are a tiny green needle in a green haystack. It is so difficult to find it. I'd argue it's probably the trickiest species in the UK to observe it or record, detect the presence of at low densities. So summer recording is not without its challenges, and one can spend an inordinate amount of time to add a dot to an atlas at a particular site. It's taken me hours and hours in some cases. Another possible problem with summer recording, it's not a huge one. I'm thinking this more in terms of inexperienced recorders, and particularly citizen science, which now is coming to the fore and adding greatly to our knowledge of species, populations and distributions. But as a lot of us know, female willow emeralds and emerald damselflies can look pretty similar, and I've seen many an emerald damselfly perching in a willow tree. So for the inexperienced recorder during the summer flight season can be another little issue, certainly not the most important one. So another tactic, what else can we do to establish the presence of willow emerald? So at this point I'll make a call out for Mark Tyrrell, my recorder immediately to the south in Northamptonshire, and some very wise words from Mark as he was having a chat with me as Willow Emerald started to expand into Leicestershire. And it was Mark who said, go out in the winter months and look for signs of Willow Emerald in the winter, and then you know they're there, and it's a lot easier to establish the presence, follow it up the next summer if needs be. So thank you, Mark, for that little tip, which led on to quite a discovery. So this is the previous distribution map, just with some overlays and some enhancements, just to put across this key message. So through the summer of 2021, 53 new sites were added in Leicestershire and Rutland. That's on a 1 kilometre grid square basis, but that's an incredible 800% uplift. But what one has to bear in mind is that is every recorder that's out observing in Leicestershire and Rutland, and there's so many conduits now for records to be sent in. I've got quite a few keen observers out there. So 53 for everyone, that's the thing to bear in mind. So inspired to go out in the winter months and methodically work through my recording area. And I have to say, it was pretty much single-handedly. No one else added any new winter sites, but I virtually doubled that. I got another 42 new sites, up to 1,500%. So that is just shows the impact or the differential between winter searching. I went through methodically and actually added 12 new 10-kilometre grid squares, which to me was absolutely phenomenal to be able to do this. So the real huge conclusion there at the bottom of the page, winter recording is far, far more productive if you're looking for willow, emerald, damselfly. So focusing recording efforts then, that's the next section I wanted to lead on to. And as I alluded to at the start of the presentation, if I can get some of you on board with this impetus, it's really important to use your efforts to the greatest advantage, and as I say, get the best bang for your buck. You're expending time, you're expending days out there searching. And I also think these days, the price of petrol and also one's carbon footprint, you've got to consider this and actually go to the correct areas where you're going to add the best value. So to do this, one way is to look on the NBN gateway. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that excellent tool. And you zoom into 10 kilometres and then go on to the Analyze Data tab. You get these lovely distribution maps, as you see on the right of the screen there, where you've got 10 kilometre squares in which the insect has been recorded are highlighted in yellow. So you get a good feel for where they are, but I place a huge caveat on this in that there's such a lag in data flow that the NBN gateway can be significantly out of date. I've thrown on my own VC55 data flow chart, but you don't need to zone in on the detail of that, but it just shows how complex and elaborate. There's levels of verification on there. It takes a long time for these records to work through, and there's quite a lag before this data appears on the NBN gateway. It will certainly eventually appear there for sure. So to get over this, have a look on the BDS website. Contact details of all the county recorders are on there. Simply drop your recorder an email. Some have put the phone numbers up. So contact your county recorder and say, where should I best spend my time? And you're looking for where those gaps are. Where are there those white areas of opportunity on that original Atlas page? So that's my advice. Contact your BDS county recorder, direct conversation, point you in the right direction. And a lot of you will have your own methodology for how to find the new recording sites, new potential areas. This is my chosen one, honed through many years of practice. I'm a great advocate of the Grab a Grid Reference Duo website from the BNHS, fantastic tool. So, for example, and this is a real life example, this grid square SK91, no records in there previously of willow emerald. So on the Grab a Grid reference site, you've got a wonderful side-by-side view of a Google map, which you can see what the habitat looks like, and then you've got an OS map, so you can see how close you are to public access, how close to roads and public footpaths. And from that, I was able to highlight this site. It's a fishing pool next to Cottesmore Airfield. I've got access there and instantly found oviposition scars last winter, so that's bang, another 10-kilometre grid square in the bag, and it really does make it very easy. I'm sure those of you who are avid recorders, don't forget to submit your records, but just a reminder, if you are going to all this effort over the coming winter period, or any recording for that matter, please submit your records. I always say to my observers, I don't care how you send your records in, as long as it goes in through one format or another, they should all be shared. So we all know about iRecord, I'm sure. We're very well blessed in Leicestershire and Rutland with Nature Spot, and I'm still very much an advocate of MapMate, and I always encourage my recorders to fill in a template, especially when they're doing a lot of recording for this bulk upload that is so useful on MapMate. So now I'm going to spend some time, and this is particularly drawing from my experience and with a lot of illustration as well. It starts off from whereabouts you should search. So if you're new to the willow emerald, as some of you may be, what sort of sites, what makes good habitat for willow emerald? So we've got to have thin, fresh branches overhanging the water, but I've underlined there in late summer, so bear in mind some sites dry out through the summer months, and if those branches are overhanging dry mud, there won't be any willow emerald activity in them. So you could waste a lot of time in the winter months by searching sites that may appear ideal in the winter but might not be in the summer. So maybe if you're not familiar with the site, a summer recce is worth a go, and then return in the winter. And there is really many a site where I've been out in the summer and not found willow emeralds, only to return in the winter and find the scars. I've got numerous examples of that. Just illustrates the value of this method. Willow emeralds need still or slow flowing water over which to oviposit, and which the life cycle will follow through. So in my counties, it's gravel pits, it's lakes, it's smaller ponds, it's canals. I've not found them on any of the rivers yet, but certainly slow flowing rivers are also used. Willow is always my first port of call. I'll talk a little bit more about other tree species, but willow is the primary host in BC 55, and I suspect very much through the rest of the country. And a final note there, may seem obvious, but if you're going methodically through an area and trying to add 10-kilometre grid squares, and you've got sites such as the one on the right with numerous trees, numerous branches, it can take a hell of a lot of searching when you're looking for low density of emeralds. It can be difficult to get vantage points to the trees, and an alternative, if you can find a site with very few trees, if you've got a site with one willow next to it, I can think of a couple of examples where I've done that. So you will instantly find some scars if they are in the area. So search sites with smaller trees to make your job easier. The pie chart I've shown there just to illustrate this tendency towards certain host species. So this is the BC 55 alone. Again, my personal experience, it'd be interesting to see what's happened in other counties, but in excess of 90% of the scars I've found in Leicestershire and Rutland have been in willow, so that is the place to start. Less so ash, so less than 10% in ash, but a fair chunk, and they are easy to find in ash. Alder, only about 1%, and hawthorn, I've just found one bush with which 2 twigs had been used, so a tiny number, but also note that lots of other tree species have been used elsewhere, certainly in other counties in the UK. These are examples of ideal willow habitat, or where willows predominate. And just to give you an insight, I'm guessing you're familiar with your local sites. If you've got a site that looks something like this, there's a fair chance willow emeralds may already be present. Bear in mind those white areas again on that atlas of opportunity. So if you live in some of those white areas, there's habitat that looks like this. These are the places to search in the winter months. As I said previously, ash and alder are much less regularly used. The photo on the left is the Oakham Canal, and as you can see there, predominant species is alder. There's no willow on that stretch, so alder are used in those very branches on there. I found some scars in alder. And the image on the right is an interesting one. This is the Grantham Canal up in the northeast of my recording area. It's quite an unusual site in that it consists of well-trimmed, very neat hedges, no willows, hardly a willow in sight, and then just these occasional standard trees in the hedges of ash. And these ashes are very, very well used. So yeah, different sites will reveal different strategies by the emerald's primary position, but that gives you a flavour of the sort of habitat in which to look. And then moving down a level then to where exactly are we looking within the tree? And this is an example on willow. So first point I've raised there is the real necessity to go out with close focusing binoculars. So this isn't a hand search that I'm advocating. As you can see, and I've put plenty more examples of oviposition sites within the trees, they are always out overhanging water, and it is very, very difficult to actually get to some that you can actually get hold of and get a close look of. You are invariably looking out several meters out over the open water, so close focusing binoculars are absolutely essential. And I always go out in my Wellingtons. I don't advocate going in and wading around in the water, can be dangerous. You can nearly always do this from a bank, but often they're overgrown and very damp in the winter months when you're recording. So get your binoculars out, get your Wellingtons out, get your flask out and head out recording. The primary area in which to search, I found, is between 1 and 4 meters above the water's surface. That is the real prime oviposition zone, and even more so between 1.5 and 2.5 meters. That is the absolute optimum site. So you can hone your searches down by looking in this area, and that's, if you think about it, that's generally, if you're standing on the bank, it's probably looking out at head height or just above, that sort of zone. So you're not looking tremendously high, and they won't go, very rarely recorded less than 1.5 meters above the water's surface. Sunny aspect is preferred. Now, that is not a hard and fast rule, but I always like to think that if I was a female willow emerald, I'd be preferring to oviposit with the sun on my back. And if you've got a pond with willow trees on the south facing bank, from my experience, it's the first place to look. You're more likely to find them in that region. The size of branch I've found is between, to make it easier to actually visualize this, I've always said between a pencil and a fat finger, and some examples of these to follow. That's the sort of size you're looking, and they always go for fresh growth. So probably a couple of years old, the growth, and again, lots of examples to follow, but they will definitely avoid tough, gnarled, old lichen encrusted branches as you sometimes find. So not even worth looking in those, it's the fresh young branches. And generally at an angle between vertical and 30 degrees, less so horizontal, and very rarely downward sloping, hardly ever downward sloping. So they're always got some degree of inclination. And a final point I've made there, and this is purely a hypothesis of mine then. So I'm out on the western limits of the range, probably not so much the western limit now as it's expanded in the last year, but on the western limits, populations are very sparse. Now, I suspect that fertile females will speculatively move from site to site and lay possibly just a single batch of eggs. And I've established this because I've searched lots of sites very diligently and found just a single set of eggs at a site, and then seemingly the insect has moved on. So I can only imagine that this is the tactic, and this is perhaps why they've been so successful as they've populated new areas. So you might be looking for quite a long while before you find a single set, is the moral of the story. And these are typical examples. So this gives you a feel, and this certainly gives you the understanding of why some binoculars are needed, because you're not going to wade out and do a hand search of these trees. There can be quite deep water below them. So these are sites where I've actually seen them, and I've actually highlighted the particular branches on which they are. And you can see, I mentioned between vertical and 30 degrees, that follows that example. And the willow species, I'm not a botanist, but you get used to looking at a lot of willow trees. So goat, grey and cracked willows, which are actually the smaller shrubby varieties. And if you think about this, there's a lot more suitable branches in that oviposition zone, that 1.5 to 2.5 meter zone with these smaller varieties of willow. If you think of a huge mature white willow, there's very few lower branches and certainly very few lower upward facing branches. So go for willows looking like the ones in these illustrations, and some more to follow, just to give you a feel when you're out looking for potential recording sites, looking for these scars, where they might be. Again, these are willow trees. So I wanted to talk now a little bit about the exact process of oviposition before I look really in detail at the signs, and thanks to Steve Camp for this wonderful illustration that is let me use in this presentation, and some of you may recognise it from his wonderful article in the April 21 BDS journal. So go and look that out, because there is a fascinating account of the incredible life cycle of this newcomer insect. So please go and look at that. But just as a high level summary of what happens, you can see there female willow emerald, her ovipositor, the black needle-like ovipositor, is just penetrating the bark of this fresh willow branch, and you can see how fresh the branch is there. That's the sort of branch that you're looking at. But you imagine this takes quite some effort for that female willow emerald to actually puncture through that tough bark. So rather than laying a single egg, she'll actually lay 3 eggs on either side of that puncture mark on the side of the actual oviposition hole. And you can see at the top right of the image there how you can see the puncture hole, and you can see the bulge under the bark where the eggs will have been laid, and the tree swells, creating these distinctive scars. So this female will have spent quite some time to find an optimum branch in which to oviposit. So she won't just lay a single egg, she'll move then, she'll move 3-5 millimeters along, make another insertion, lay another 6 eggs, move on, move on, move on, and you get this characteristic line of dots. So this is what they look like. So some nice photographs of my finger, but this is what's happening. So you can start to see now, you've got, certainly in the center image, you've got the puncture hole, and you've got the distinctive double bulges either side. So what you're looking for is straight or slightly spiraling sets of neat double bumps. And a friend of mine described this as it's like a sewing machine's been down that tree, and it is effectively, it's a sewing machine action of that ovipositor of the females, and the double bumps raise either side as the tree reacts to the presence of the eggs. And I find they stand out with unnatural regularity. So imagine there's all humps and bumps on an average willow branch, nothing too symmetrical and regular, but then you've got these regular sewing machine type lines. Couple of pieces of advice generally, and I'm looking out the window, and this afternoon will be an ideal afternoon to look, though there's probably a few too many leaves still on the branches, but sunlight makes things a lot easier. If you imagine you're looking on a dull, flat lit day, it can sometimes be more difficult because sunshine actually casts shadows, and shadows can actually make these scars stand out better, much more obviously. Avoid windy days. The branches will be flailing around. It's very hard to methodically scan through them with your binoculars looking for these tiny scars. So avoid windy days. And final tip, if you know a site nearby where there's an established population of willow emeralds, if you search there first, go and get your eye in. So get a feel for the position in the trees where the scars will be found, and also the variety of the form of these scars, because they can vary from the very obvious to the very, very subtle. And if you get your eye in first at somewhere where you know they're present, and then start to move on to new areas, that can be quite useful. So I'm just going to run now through some typical examples. So left-hand slide, very obvious. So they range from the very obvious to the very subtle. These are all in willow branches, but the left-hand example looks to me as if it's a scar from the previous season, and the eggs have actually emerged. There seem to be large emergent holes there. Now, I'm often a little bit reluctant to say for sure, but I'm pretty certain that would demonstrate that willow emerald has been on the site for 2 years, whereas 2, 3 and 4, they're all very fresh examples, and hopefully you start to get to the idea now. There's the puncture holes and there's the bumps either side, and I don't know what causes some trees to react more strongly than others, but certainly some will be very subtle, and some will produce swellings very rapidly. So there's some more examples in willow, and further willow examples. Again, I wanted to stress they range from the very obvious to the very subtle. And 1 and 3, again, I would say are examples from the previous season, and that the eggs have emerged and dropped in the previous spring. But certainly 2 and 4 are examples from the season or the autumn oviposition period before the winter in which you're looking. And number 2 is really subtle, and that's an example in a weeping willow, and I've very rarely found oviposition in weeping willows in Leicestershire. These are all examples of ash, and ash is a great tree in which to search for signs of willow emeralds because they're much easier on an ash tree. So imagine these are the top limbs. They're the last 3 nodes that are the previous season's growth. They'll be oviposited into the fresh ends of the branches. There's much fewer branches to search through in an ash tree. They're not densely packed thin branches, but they are generally somewhat thicker branches, and there's less of them, and the scars do stand out very well. The bark on an ash is much smoother. It's a very smooth barked tree on these young limbs, and as you can see, they do stand out very, very well on an ash. Here's some more examples. And also, because there's probably fewer branches, there's a tendency for them to receive much more activity as well. So rather than the sparse scar or 2, they're often very well populated. So it's a great tree in which to search, and it makes life a lot easier. Now, I would say this is the opposite end of the scale, and in my experience, alder can be the trickiest tree in which to search. It's got very irregular bark. You can see instantly how we've got lots of humps and bumps on an alder branch, and they are more difficult to find scars. Now, it could be argued that that's why I found fewer examples on alder, but I've spent a lot of time looking, and it does seem a valid response. And I think, again, another hypothesis, but I think the bark on alder may be more, it's tougher and less susceptible to penetration for oviposition, so it's used less rarely. It's one of the trees of last resort in Leicestershire. But the hawthorn, I found, is very much the host of extreme last resort. This is an example from the Grantham Canal, and to put this into context, there was no other vegetation within hundreds of meters of this section of canal than this one hawthorn bush, and I found these 2 very fresh sucker-like branches, and as you can see, these really are obliterated with scars. So it was the only place where the willow emeralds could oviposit on this particular section. So that gives you a bit of a sort of running through in the priority or the most likely used species as well. And that pretty much brings me to the conclusion here, and 3 messages probably I wanted to use in summary. It's the first one was I've emphasised of making your efforts count. So hopefully I've won a few of you over, and again think how exciting it is if you can be the person to add that dot, for example, to SP39 in Leicestershire. But make your efforts count and drop a line to your Vice County recorder via the BDS website and ask them where they suggest you should go out recording and where those real gaps are. So make your efforts count and get your eye in. If you've not done this before, go to a site with known records. Again, your BDS recorder could probably help you with this and say, you know, go to a certain site and there's scars aplenty, but get your eye in terms of whereabouts in the tree you're best to look, and also the variety of form of the scars and how obvious they can be versus how subtle they can be. And overall, enjoy it. I do find it really, really exciting and record this recording buzz of when I find a new site, I add a new dot to the atlas. And also you're clearly all advocates of Odonata, you're all keen observers, and why put your binoculars and cameras away and wait for the spring? You can actually expand your enjoyment of Odonata right through the forthcoming winter period, and hopefully add to our knowledge of this, the distribution of this fascinating species. I know there's questions at the end. I will be available in the forum at the end, and I just want to leave you with this page from the Atlas of Opportunity, and think about where you are and what you can add in terms of filling in those gaps. That's me. Thank you.